Well, hey there, idiots. Welcome back to Observe. In today's video, we're going to be analyzing the nonverbal communication of Sherri Papini in regards to the case surrounding her disappearance. More on that in just a second. Let's go ahead and roll the intro first. All right, for those of you who are not in the know of the details of this case, on the morning of November 2nd in 2016, Sherri Papini, a 34-year-old wife and mother of two from Redding, California, was reported missing. According to her husband, she had gone out jogging and simply never returned. Law enforcement quickly mobilized a massive search operation, treating the case as a possible abduction. 3 weeks later, on November 24th, which was Thanksgiving Day, Papini was found on the side of County Road 17 in Yolo County, around 150 miles from where she had initially disappeared. She was emaciated, had visible injuries, including a brand on her shoulder, her hair had been cut, and she was bound with a number of different restraints. According to her own statements given to federal and local authorities, Papini claimed that she had been abducted at gunpoint by two Hispanic women who held her captive, abused her, and eventually released her without an explanation. She claimed one captor was older, the other was younger. She also described specific accents, clothing, and behavior. Law enforcement, in turn, expended significant resources attempting to identify the suspects and verify her story. For over 4 years, investigators pursued leads, reviewed surveillance footage, conducted interviews, and analyzed DNA evidence. Eventually, a breakthrough came, not in the form of eyewitness testimony or a confession, but from science itself. A DNA sample recovered from the clothing Papini was wearing upon her return was entered into a law enforcement database. It matched a male profile of someone previously not connected to the case or the investigation at all. That man was traced to an ex-boyfriend of Papini's who lived in Southern California, James Reyes. In a voluntary interview, James admitted that Sherri had stayed with him for the entirety of her disappearance. He explained that she had contacted him asking to be picked up, claiming she needed to escape an abusive relationship with her husband. He complied, driving her from Redding to his home where she stayed until they arranged her return. He stated that he had no idea that she was going to claim that she was kidnapped. His statement was corroborated by physical evidence, including the DNA match and some limited cell phone records as well. He also admitted to helping Papini inflict some of the injuries, such as the branding, at her request. It was at this point that law enforcement determined that the entire abduction was totally fabricated. On March 3rd of 2022, Sherri Papini was arrested and charged with making false statements to federal agents and committing mail fraud, the latter charge stemming from over $30,000 in victim assistance funds that she had received while perpetuating this seemingly apparent hoax. Papini later signed a plea agreement. In April of 2022, she formally admitted in federal court that she had staged the entire kidnapping. She pled guilty on both charges, acknowledged the falsehood of her original story, and agreed to pay restitution. On September 19th of 2022, she was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison and ordered to pay over $300,000 in restitution to multiple agencies, including the California Victim Compensation Board, Social Security Administration, and the FBI themselves. Law enforcement officials and the U.S. Department of Justice noted the severity of her actions, not just in terms of financial cost, but also in diverting critical resources, misleading the public, and undermining the credibility of genuine victims everywhere. In a recent docuseries available to view on HBO Max, Sherri has now presented a new narrative of abuse and control. In the multi-episode series, she talks about how she felt at risk with her then-husband, Keith Papini, painting a picture of a life completely controlled by him financially and physically. She claims that it was this upsetting home life that pushed her to reach out to her ex-boyfriend in search of support and connection. While she admits to intentionally leading him on for attention, her new story takes a very dark turn as she states that she never once planned on the kidnapping, but rather that James did in fact kidnap her, torture her, abuse her, and then held her captive against her will for 22 days before releasing her on Thanksgiving Day. In an attempt to rectify her earlier deceit, she said that she lied about being kidnapped by 2 Hispanic women in an attempt to leave a subtle trail of breadcrumbs for the investigators to be able to be led to James and to be able to allow her to be back with her children much more immediately. Within the episode of the series itself, she explains that she described her abductors as Hispanic women, even going so far as to give the character sketch artist descriptions of them because she alleged that her ex's mother was Hispanic and that she hoped that that small detail would somehow point detectives in his direction without outright mentioning him. She even stated that one of the women that she described to the sketch artist was based off of James's mother. However, it was also revealed that she had lied about even that aspect of things, as his mom was found to be Irish rather than Hispanic, a detail which she seemed to conveniently shrug off as inconsequential during the docuseries. She also then failed to adequately explain how the lie she had told about being abducted by 2 Hispanic women would enable her to be with her children more quickly than if she had just simply stated the truth. In an attempt to address this line of questioning, the complicated thought process she presented was that if she had simply been honest about the incident, James would have seen it in the media, and somehow she would not have been able to be with her children due to negative actions perhaps from him. Though the full logic as to how that would have actually played out was not immediately evident. Despite more information and coverage surfacing regarding the case, the public opinion around Sherri Papini has not improved. While she has received no official mental health diagnoses that I was able to verify, many people, both trained and untrained, have been tossing around the possibility of various mental disorders. Some claim that she is histrionic, others claim narcissism, while still more suggest borderline or a combo there within. However, Sherri's longtime therapist and supporter, Dr. Stephen Higgs, believes that she has something called self-defeating personality disorder, which is currently not recognized in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. While mental health certainly plays a large role in the case, relying on diagnoses to divert responsibility has become more complex due to Sherri's pathological tendency to lie when she believes that it will benefit her. This has left many feeling fairly unsure about what to believe, especially as questioning a story of abuse can be so quickly shifted into the realm of victim blaming and enabling abusers. Regardless of sensitivity and grace, everyone seems to agree that once you lie about one aspect of a story, the credibility of the entire narrative is thrown into question. The primary question then, in the minds of thousands who have taken an interest in the case, is why? Why lie about so many aspects of the story when the truth would likely have saved time, resources, heartache, prison time, and the list goes on. In today's video, I will be closely examining Papini's nonverbal displays and kinesics, as well as considering her audio dynamics and verbal patterns during moments from an interview held only 4 days after her apparent release from captivity, and then comparing what we find during that with some footage that was recently released by Inside Edition in order to see what sort of clarity we can gain as to the truth behind this case. There are hours and hours of footage outside of these clips, so if you would like to be able to see more analysis on this case, or perhaps the footage of the first portion of this video, just let me know by liking the video and commenting. Anyways, let's go ahead and get right into it.
You don't know who we are? That's who I am. I know
who he is. Right. And he says you're okay for him. That's what I
That's where
trust.
We're at.
Yeah.
So if you want to, it's the ball's in your court.
I don't know. There's certain things that are very difficult to explain. There's certain things that it's
I'm going to go ahead and pause here just to make note of a few things that she's done verbally here. She's already called attention to the fact that she knows her husband and trusts being in the room with him. This is something that has come up repeatedly within all of the different interviews until this recent documentary, is that she really trusted and wanted to be around her husband, which does make things a little bit more complicated with this new narrative of things. Now, obviously, there are always complications within these storylines regardless, but it is something we want to make note of, that at this moment she is trying to anchor with her husband. Now, whether or not that's because he is controlling and she's worried that if she does something apart from him and there might be negative consequences for that, or if it's because she genuinely does draw some strength or solidarity from being around him, is difficult to be able to say. And I'm sure depending on who you ask, the answer to that would probably be different. So that's a verbal thing that we want to make note of. Another thing that she does, and it's not shown prevalently in these specific clips that we're going to be looking at here, but throughout the rest of the interviews that I've seen, and this one specifically here, is that she's very comfortable talking over somebody else, regardless if they're a person in authority and if they're in the middle of saying something. She regularly interrupts both of these investigators as they're trying to ask questions for her or reassure her or get something out, some information out for her. She does regularly interrupt them. I feel like that gives us a little bit of a heads up as to what's going on in her psychology. She's not really making a lot of space for anybody else. But again, we're having to have a lot of grace around this, considering that at this point she may have been released from a possible abduction. So that's how we're having to approach this at this point. Another thing that you can hear that she does, and it's called a palatal click, and that's when somebody has the pressing of their tongue against the top of their mouth and it makes a little click when they release it. And that is usually an indicator of wanting to garner extra attention for a specific thing, and it's also related to negative emotions. So you'll see that come up from her regularly throughout that, and I wanted to make note of it because you'll likely hear it. It does come up a fair bit, but she's going to continue talking on through these things, and yeah, there's a lot to unpack here.
It's, for me, it's a feeling. It's not facts.
Okay.
So if there's something that's not a fact, if there's something that I was feeling, because I don't speak Spanish, but there was a lot of body language, and I can understand body language.
Okay.
So there's things for me that I feel went a certain way. Are those things that you want?
Yep.
Okay, fascinating thing. When she says, I don't speak Spanish, she does a very prolonged eye blink in there. That eye blocking is just a fascinating thing. It needs to have some more touches of that style of gesture in there before it's reliable for any form of tell. But if you do establish some form of pattern with that, the eye blocking gestures can be a desire to separate oneself from a negative something, and that can be a lie, that can be a negative emotion, that could be a negative instance or anything along those lines. So you see that eye blocking come in there. She does that there when talking about not speaking Spanish. Now, sure enough, we know 2020 that there was never any Spanish involved in this situation here. There were no two Hispanic women. So this speaking of Spanish side of things is definite low-lying deceit right now, and we see that little eye blocking come in there pretty quickly with that. So I want to be able to make note of that. I also just found it funny that she's mentioning body language in regards to people that didn't exist. And so all of these details that she's going to be giving off of that, they simply don't exist. And I just found that a little bit humorous. Anyways, let's continue.
Yep.
Or those things you want me to hold back because they're not facts?
Tell me anything you want. You tell us what's on your mind, what's on your heart, what you thought, what you felt, what you smelled, you tell us everything.
Okay.
And then we'll put them through the investigation and through follow-up questions.
So to you, everything is important.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Also, my skin is still very itchy everywhere, so I apologize. Everything is itchy all everywhere.
No problem.
All right, so she did, again, a little interrupting of where the investigator was talking, but he was trailing off, so we'll give her grace on that. But again, another one of those points in there. And then she also calls light to the nonverbal fact that she is itchy and fidgety. And I find that fascinating that she does that there, because she also admits that she is a fan of true crime and has read books on cases and things like that. So you know that she's paid attention to some of these aspects of things. So I'm wondering if at this point she's bringing up that she's doing this so much because of feeling itchy in a way to be able to offer herself a little bit of alleviation to pressure if she's feeling like she might be getting a little bit agitated or antsy around questions, things like that. Now we're going to start getting into a lot more of the nonverbal side of this as well.
Where would you like to start?
I have no idea.
Okay.
So on November 2nd, 2016, what happened?
So start us off on the day.
From the beginning.
Yeah, start with there and see what happens.
Let's talk about the Christmas present with Keith.
Okay.
I started wrapping a Christmas present for Keith, a little American flag pillow that Tyler and I had picked out right before it cools. couldn't find tape. I had tape inside, ran out of tape, and then couldn't find any more tape anywhere else. I was frustrated, left it around to open because there was no routine to complete the wrapping of it. The usual routine for the chickens, clean house, clean everything, just usual. And then, yeah, text my husband to come home for lunch, which I didn't, you know, that's why they're saying. He's like, thanks for doing that last text message. I need to accept my friend. Yeah.
It's back on topic.
Obviously, that was fast forwarded in there. There wasn't anything that was important narratively that she was presenting there. And then non-verbally speaking, there weren't enough small movements to justify watching the entire thing. But what I wanted to point out in that is the general demeanor that she carries throughout this. A lot of people, experts and non-experts, have pointed out that it feels interesting the level of okayness that she's presenting in this interview days after what was an extremely traumatic event, if her narrative is to be believed. And so that behavioral misalignment has been sticking out to many people, and I wanted to show this to you here. She's quite comfortable in many aspects of this interaction and seems at many times to also appreciate the attention that's coming from it, likes being able to tell the story and have people listen to her in a way that is really doting. And so we see that energy coming in there regularly. And now we're going to get to a part where she's going to start to try to talk about some more of the traumatic events that she's claiming she experienced. And we'll talk about the nonverbal communication along with it.
On topic. So you just about get to the mailboxes. And the mailboxes at
Yes.
Sunrise and Old Oregon Trail.
Correct.
Go from there, if you can.
I'm before the mailboxes. I start to slow down. I see a vehicle go past. I see a vehicle go past Sunrise Drive to maybe like the front two tires are past the actual street sign, and then it backs up. And I immediately have that feeling of, that was weird.
You're doing good, Sherri. If you're having a
The
hard
window goes down, but it was a woman.
Something that I want to obviously make note of is that her eyes are closed and she's keeping her head kind of tilted downwards. She had already asked the interviewers, the interrogators, the investigators here, if it would be okay if she did that way. And so I still want to make note of that because it is more easy to pull off deceit oftentimes if you're not looking directly at the person that you're working with. This does not mean that if a person's not looking at you while they're talking that they're lying. It's not that at all. However, it is easier to lie to someone if you don't have to look at them. So that is something that I want to call note to, and we'll also pay attention to whether or not those sorts of gestures, those expressions of eye blocking and prolonged disconnect of gaze like that, if that pops up in any important points. Now, we had already seen her do an eye blocking gesture once when mentioning two Hispanic women, and now as she's talking about this entire abduction scene that she's going through, she does not look up or out. And she does look up and out when recollecting in other areas that we can verify are true. So it's just a little bit of a contrast that we need to make note of as we're developing and understanding some of her patterns as she's going through this. Along with that, you've heard a number of those palatal clicks like I had mentioned before, and we're also seeing a number of lip licking gestures in there. She does call light to the fact that she is bothered by how her lips are feeling chapped or something along those lines. So that's in there as a good physical reason for what we're seeing there. I wanted to just kind of make note of a number of those as we're going through it. Now, again, we're getting to this story of two Hispanic women pulling up in a car to abduct her, which we know is false. So let's see what we can learn pattern-wise as we know she's telling deceit at this point.
And they back up.
What?
You had a hard time calling.
It's frustrating because I
I know she was wearing a hat, but I can't see the color, and I can't see her clothes.
All right, so we've seen an escalation of the already prevalent and present eye blocking gesture that has been there. And now she's going into talking about, I can't see the clothes, I know, blah, 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 which again, she's lying. We know at this point she's lying. She has moved down to a much deeper, full face blocking gesture here. Now, we want to keep that in mind because this is multiple points that we're getting to. We could even see this as now 3 points of eye blocking gestures in regards to made up stuff, to deceit. So perhaps this is her tell, is as soon as we start seeing these facial manipulators blocking gestures around her face and eyes, that might be our understanding that she's bending the truth or something's a little bit off with what she's saying. Stuff to keep track of.
Okay.
Rather focus on the small details. Let's talk about the big details.
I'll make a note.
She asked for help. I want to say it's maybe like a hey or something to get my attention.
Okay, so with this, you can hear her trying to push emotion into her voice. Now, if this is genuine emotion, as she lifts back up, we'll expect to see some of the physiological responses to that, especially with the way that she's pushing the emotion. She's trying to add in some sniffs and trying to add in some crying in there. So if we see that physiological response, the responses that are much more difficult to consciously control, if we see that happening, then we can kind of understand that this is a genuine emotion that she's processing. If we don't see that, then we have questions. Does not mean that it's not the genuine emotion, but there are enough things that are off about it to keep a level of cynicism towards it. Now, as she's talking about these things that she's seeing here or hearing here, you can also see her doing very tiny micro movements. No, while she's not looking at anybody, she's still doing the prevalent eye blocking, face blocking gesture. She's now also doing micro movements, no, as she's talking about a specific thing. If they were macro movements, larger ones, I would relate it to the it's unbelievable, you wouldn't believe that line of thinking and psychology. Since they're so small, for those of you that are new to the channel, the smaller the movement, the less likely it is to be consciously controlled. And when you see a small movement like that that goes out that does not line up with what's verbally being presented, it can be a desynchronization point, letting us know again that at this point she's lying. We know that 2020, but she's showing that non-verbally as well. It's a point of deceit that we can now start to understand patterns much more clearly. We know she blocks gesture, she blocks her face, eyes, things like that. And she might also have some desynchronization movements in there as well. Things to keep track of as we move forward.
Is that the passenger or the driver?
Passenger.
Is the car on Sunrise right now, or is it still on
No.
Old Oregon Trail?
It's on Old Oregon Trail.
Okay. How far away do you think you are when that happened?
When what? What are you asking?
When the car stops? Do you know how?
Now she's lifted back up. She's tried to blow her nose. When you hear her blow her nose, there's not a lot of mucus in there. It sounds like maybe your average nose blow. And then when she takes the Kleenex away, the only inflammation that I can detect is the very temporary inflammation of the fact she just rubbed her nose. If you look around there, there's no other inflammation. And then if you look at her eyes, there's no eye shine. There aren't any tears there. And the inflammation, the redness that you find around the eyes due to that is also non-existent. She's completely dry in this area. So that doesn't line up with the level of emotion that she was presenting audibly to us while her face was covered. So there is a little bit of a disconnect there. There is definitely the possibility that maybe she was feeling that emotion and then her physiological sides of things just didn't follow. Maybe it's difficult to process, or there's some sort of traumatic block. Any sort of answer can be given here. But since we also know at this point that she has been lying about these details that she's giving here, to us, that kind of gives us a little bit more of an idea that this is probably just emotional disconnect because it's not genuine. She's forcing this because it's a lie. So again, if this comes up later, if she has moments in other interviews or anything like that, that she starts to push this heavy, heavy emotion in there, and then there's no physiological representation of it, well, then we can kind of rely on the pattern that we're establishing here for that. Just stuff to keep in mind as we're continuing on.
How close were you?
Which time? It stopped twice. Once when it went past the street sign, once when it backed up. Which time were you asking?
Both.
The first time, again, it went past Sunrise Drive sign, but not all the way. Backed up and stopped. I want to say there's a fire hydrant right there.
All right. Question was, how far away was the vehicle when it stopped? She immediately tries to throw it into details. Well, which time? The one at the forward or the one when it backs up? And he's like, it's both. Because frankly, the answer to that was inconsequential if you had answered further or closer one. Just the space and the awareness and some of the details around it are important to be able to gain here. So she tries to hang it up in those details. And then when she answers the question itself, she doesn't answer the question. She just says it pulled forward and then it pulled back, and then I think there was a fire hydrant, which is interesting details, but not an answer to the question that was asked here. And it also then, it just adds a little bit of complexity when you want to go into verifying her credibility in her storyline, is if she can't answer the question that's being presented when it is simple. Again, as with all of these, which I want to, I guess, offer a general disclaimer. With all of these, since this is human behavior, it's never going to be a black and white. We don't have the tech for it. We don't have the science for it yet. It's never going to be a black and white. So there's always the possibility of an exception. There is a hoop that can be jumped through to be able to make a different answer. And sometimes those things do exist. So with these analyses that you see, you still have to take it in context with all of the rest of the evidence. If you just watch this, you're going to be working with only partial information with how we have it at this point. So yes, there's the possibility that she's responding to this in this way because it was traumatic and she couldn't remember, something along those lines, or it could be because this isn't a genuine recollection because she was lying at this point.
I walked towards where the vehicle had backed up, but was still far enough away from it that because I was still cautious. I had my phone in my right hand and my earbuds on, and I took out my left to hear her. And then she opened the door. And then I saw the small revolver.
With this little recollection of things here, I'm watching how she gestures as she's telling her story. So she says that she's carrying her phone in her right hand, and then she takes her earbud out, and she says she takes out her left earbud, her left, and as she does so, she gestures to her right side. Now that gesture incongruency there is a little bit of a red flag. This has been used in prior cases as a person is talking about directions that they're going and they say they're going to the left, but they gesture to the right. Well, pay attention to what their body said rather than what they were saying verbally. In other cases, it had even led to areas that was a revealing portion of the case. They were able to find what they were looking for in the direction gestured rather than the direction given. And so that sort of nonverbal incongruency there lets us know that this could also be a part of the fabricated storyline. As she's saying, I took out my left, and obviously goes to take out her right. That is a disconnect. Now, it's not a gesture. It's not like we could get a direction one way or the other, but it is still within that same vein of thinking. The incorrect gesture went with the words, and so something's up there. Why is that disconnect there?
And I immediately ducked down. I crouched down, like in a ducking, crouching.
Like all the way on the ground. So like the fetal position while you like Like a catcher's
I mean, my
position?
knees weren't on the ground. It was almost.
I keep noticing the escalation of the face touching manipulators, eye blocking gestures, things like that coming out around these points. We saw another area right before where she did a whole gesture like that before going into something that we knew wasn't true. And then now as she's talking about this area with seeing the gun and getting down, we start to see her do more again, which if we're going to rely on her pattern means that that's not true, which of course it wasn't true. The Hispanic women didn't exist. The gun didn't exist. There wasn't that. It's now a pattern that's really hard to ignore. It takes more effort to psychologically ignore that than it does to move forward, accepting that that is a pattern.
Yes. It was, okay, so across the road, phone's in my hand, earbud out, towards the vehicle. This, not all the way down, squatting, not crouching, squatting. Laid my phone down. I can't remember if she said, we don't want to hurt you, we don't want to kill you. I can't remember exactly if it's, we don't want to something, we don't want to something, we don't want to something. And then I put my phone down. As soon as I set it down, I was so mad because I couldn't call my husband. And as soon as I set it down, and then I turned and I pulled my hair out because I ran away. And I didn't, and I should have. And it just, that's all I.
All right. Kept all of that in there because you can really hear how much emotion is being pushed into there. It sounds like she is tears running down her face, gonna have snot coming out of her nose. This is a hard experience in memory for her as she's talking about these two women with a gun, and very traumatic. So the physiological responses to that emotion would be there. You hear it there. She's trying to push it into there. Tries to add sniffling. It's going to add some eye wiping in there, no doubt. And so we would expect to see the physiological responses to that emotion happen. Let's play it.
Do you want to come back up to the table?
And then I got up and went this direction. And I can't.
Just real quick there, got up, went this direction, and then the same interesting eye gesture that she's done there a couple of times in other areas that are obviously questionable to her level of credibility.
And I can't remember. I can't remember lifting my leg. I can't remember the back door open.
Just take a drink of water if you need to. And I want to run something by you and see if this might be able to help a little bit. Breath and some more. You're good. You're recalling things from like your first person view, correct? And you're going through, you're seeing it through your own eyes. You understand what I mean by that? You're doing good. Okay.
All right, so there you see it. We've gone through the whole show of things. We've reached the end of things. She's done her eye wiping and there's no tears, there's no redness. Then you hear her try to do the crying sniffle in there. And when you do, it's a clean, breathing just fine. There's no mucus. You do not hear moisture in there. And then she tries to wipe her nose and there's nothing that's there either. And so all of the physiological responses that would be related to that intense display of emotion that we just heard are non-existent. So we're left again. This is another point of this area of emotional and nonverbal disconnect. Why does that disconnect exist? Could be trauma, could be because it's being faked, because this recollection that she's talking about isn't genuine, so it's not affecting her emotionally the way that she's trying to present it to do so. There's not much left of this earlier footage that we're going to go through, and then we'll switch over to some of the most recent, like I said, that was just released here within the last month or so.
But as you're going through this, you're you're pulling your memory from the backside of your head and trying to remember everything. And sometimes it goes back to your brain saying, I can't get there right now. It's kind of like a computer.
All right, so there it was. You saw now a decent chunk of that interview. Again, I think it's like an hour, hour and a half long for the total thing. So if you would like me to go through that a little bit more intentionally, let me know. Now we're on to the new portion of this. Let's pay attention to her nonverbal cues and see what sorts of patterns have made it through, or if any have, if there's anything that can be gleaned. I looked for the entirety of this interview, and for the life of me, I could not track it down no matter how hard I tried. So we're working with about 2 minutes of horrifically chopped together footage. It's gonna be iffy at best, but there's still details that we can learn, especially from what we learned in that first portion of things.
Sherri Papini breaks down in tears as she reveals to Inside Edition her broken relationship with her 2 children.
It's the worst kind of torture. Going from primary caregiver of your children to just nothing. I miss them. I miss them so much.
All right, physiologically speaking, her eyes are showing and reflecting what her presented emotion is. We've heard that presented emotion many other times, but now we're seeing some of the physiological responses that are just so difficult to consciously control. Perhaps in the past 9 years of being more in front of the camera with these sorts of interviews, perhaps she's learned to push that side of the physiological. Actors and actresses do it regularly, and people who are good at that specific thing can do it on the drop of a hat. Perhaps she can do that. I don't feel encouraged to go down that path. I don't think that she's an amazing actress or anything along those lines. Or even further down that, there was never a question in my mind whether or not she liked her kids. I think that she did love her kids, as many parents do love their kids, and that may be one of the few points that she did try a little bit more so in, although there are obviously a lot of allegations around that as well, and even just the existence of a still very bitter ongoing custody battle between her ex-husband and herself is also a little bit indicative of some other questions around it. However, I do not think that she's faking here that she misses her kids. I think that she probably did enjoy having children. There wasn't anything that really pushed me away from that, aside, like I said, from those couple of stories.
What's your relationship like with your kids now?
Right now, I'm only able to see my daughter, and it's fine. You know, it's bubbly and bright, and every time we see each other, we're excited.
When she says it's fine, obviously there's a no shake in there. It could be that you wouldn't believe it, which, I mean, I understand why she would be feeling that sentiment behind of it's fine. But then along with that, she does a little bit of a lopsided shrug in there as well. So the fact that the macro no shake does kind of wrap up in a tiny no shake, a little bit more of a micro no shake, and the shrug in there, I wonder if that's really the case. I'm wondering if there is a little bit more complexity between her and her daughter than what she's letting on here. She's saying it's fine. Her body's saying it's kind of maybe not so fine.
Excited and end up holding each other and reading and talking about boys and school.
But Sherri reveals she has 0 contact with her 12-year-old son. Why are you not able to see him?
It's a difficult process right now, and he's going through quite a lot. And unfortunately, he's just not reachable right now, so I don't know a lot. And it's not generally normal for a child to reject a parent.
All right, so we heard her palatal click in there, which that, again, there's not like a hinging emotion around that. You're not going to get a lot out of a palatal click. It's just a nonverbal thing to make note of. And then while she's talking about this aspect and this dynamic with her son, her blink rate increases and the length of the blinks themselves increase. So that increase of blink rate and blink length pushes me towards that being a possible eye blocking gesture, which we know. We know that from prior existing patterns that are really hard to ignore, that she does these eye blocking, manipulating, facial manipulator gestures like that when being deceitful. So perhaps this is a time that she's being deceitful. Just because she does those manipulators when being deceitful does not mean that when she does those manipulators, she is being deceitful. It's a different overlap there. Deceitful will likely include those manipulators. Those manipulators does not necessarily include deceit. I hope that all tracks.
Lie after lie after lie. Why believe you now?
I'm not actually asking anyone to believe me now. I'm simply taking my voice back to tell my story from my perspective. It's difficult. It's difficult when you go. I've been to so many interviews, and it's like the minute they hear my name and find out who I am, it's like, you know, we don't want the attention. The injuries.
At the beginning, as she's responding to that, you see a little bit of a venting behavior in there with a lopsided shrug. The venting behavior is an indicator of agitation, nervousness. You'll see that come out a lot more, and it's literally you get warm in the under areas of your body. Now, that can be environmentally inspired. A warm room makes you feel warm. Duh. However, if it's a spike, if it's not there regularly, if it's been warm in that room the whole time and she hasn't been doing any venting behaviors and then suddenly she begins to do a venting behavior around a certain topic or line of questioning, what have you, that's a spike. Pay attention. And then she's doing little micro no shakes with that as she's talking about this, but those micro no shakes are synchronized with what she's saying. So I get where that's coming from, but the verbiage that she's saying is that she doesn't care. And that's where I'm curious about what this lopsided shrug is in there for. I don't care. Is that like I don't know, I don't care, that sort of dismissive lopsided shrug? Or is it she's showing a lopsided shrug because she's feeling insecure about saying she doesn't care, which is kind of supported by the fact that she's talking. So she can't not care while also trying to say things, because then that means that she cares. Otherwise, she doesn't need to say anything, clear her name or whatnot. She could go about because she doesn't care. I think she does care. And we've seen a little bit of the nonverbal around that to kind of support that, but it's really, I mean, it's inconsequential. Of course she cares.
The injuries to my body represent quite a lot of culpability, and they're injuries that I couldn't possibly do to myself.
He hasn't been arrested, and police say he had nothing to do with the kidnapping. Have you any concerns about being sued for defamation?
Well, you can't sue somebody for telling the truth. So if he were to do that, for example,
it feels rich coming from her about telling the truth. With that too, if you haven't watched the documentaries, definitely go watch those. They help add a lot. There's one on HBO Max, and then there's also one that's available on Disney Plus and Hulu. Go watch both of them. They present some different details that will help get you a little bit more rounded of an understanding of the case. It is going to be a lot of hours of looking through things, but I mean, go ahead. The reason that we're saying that the police have cleared James in this is because evidence seemed to back it up, and he also passed the polygraph all the way through. Polygraphs are obviously as effective as the person giving them, and there's a lot of art to that. It's not just a cold, hard, black and white science. Again, dealing with human behavior rarely can be. However, James passed the entirety of the polygraph with flying colors. And on the flip side of that, Sherri did not. She lied multiple times and then later admitted to lying in the polygraph within the same episode. So she's shown a pattern of lying. We don't know James. We don't really know much about him. We don't know his history too much. We don't know if he has a proclivity to lying a lot. There have been some insinuations that he is a violent human, but it's only kind of word of mouth. It's not something that we've been able to actually see any hard evidence on. We have seen hard repeat evidence that Sherri is willing to lie at all times. At any point, she will lie about stuff. So I don't know. We've got some things to be able to juggle here as we're going through it. We've got 30 seconds left and then we'll talk.
to do that, for example, I welcome it. I would love to get him in a courtroom. And frankly, he would have to answer to everything that he did in mutilating my body and keeping this secret.
I know that you said that you're single. Have you thought about getting married again, having more kids?
Oh, I'm so open to it. I'm so open to it. Yeah. I think that my life is full of happiness now. And that would be really great. That would be great.
I don't know. I would have some suspicions wanting to get in a relationship with her just for some reason or another. Another thing that I did note is 2 points in this little last half of the interviews here. She pushes in that almost crying emotion again. She tries to, very quick though, just little in there, you hear it in her voice. And so that lets me also know that she uses that tone of speaking to just amplify what she's saying, which then that lets us know why she's so good at doing that sound of producing that audible emotion when it doesn't really reflect on her nonverbal side of things. That's one of her things that she does to try to amplify a point that she's talking about. So just some things that we've understood a little bit more about her. If you would like me to take a look at more of this case, let me know in the comments below by also hitting like on the video, subscribing, doing all those different things. But without further ado, that's all that I've got for today. My name is Logan and you have been oh so awesome as you always are, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers, guys.